All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Beinhacker, and I got a special guest today who agreed to come on the show. I heard him on a TED Talk in a networking group that I was in, and he's a professor of entrepreneurship at the London Business School, and he's kind enough to come on. He's actually in Colorado, but the London Business School obviously is in England. And author, TED Talk. If you just search John Mullins TED Talks, you're going to get a bunch of them, and he's got some great stuff to share with us today. So if you are listening on your favorite directory, please leave us a 5-star review. If you are watching us on YouTube, I hope you're watching the YouTube channel. Subscribe to the channel, like us, so we can keep connecting with really, really great people who bring really valuable information like John. So let's get on with today's show. All right, John, we had a little bit of a technical glitch there. I don't know what happened. Okay, can you hear me?
I
We're
can.
all on? Okay, great. So we will fix that in post-production. You can hear my opening because I'm a lawyer when I put a disclaimer immediately on the show. So, all right, well, thanks for coming on the show and taking the time. I know it's a little bit earlier out in Colorado, but yeah. So I heard your TED Talks. I have this Wednesday morning group. And we share things. People give presentations, but every once in a while, it's somebody's job to find a TED Talk, to find some information to share with other people. So my friend Fred found your talk, and I'm like, I got to get John on the show. I got to figure out how to do this. So reached out, and you were nice enough to come on. So I thank you very much.
Delighted to be here, Mitch.
All right. Why don't we talk a little bit about your background as an entrepreneur? Because I know you're involved in some startups and stuff. And then maybe, what made you go into, why are you a professor now?
It's kind of a long and convoluted story. I did a talk for a bunch of graduates of Lehigh University where I was an undergrad many years ago, a couple of months ago, and someone asked me, could you explain the plan that led to this career you've had over now a long period of time? And I said, plan?
Yeah.
There's no plan,
Right.
A door opens in front of you and you walk through it, and one thing leads to another. But I, when I got out of business school a long time ago, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do, and I got a job offer from what I thought was a really interesting retail business in Chicago called Jewel Companies. They're primarily a supermarket business, but they had drugstores and other kinds of stores.
Okay.
And I ended up working for Jewel for 7 years, and then. At about that time, I ran into at a Stanford alumni event a former classmate of mine, a guy named Jack Eugster, a wonderful guy, who I'd known in business school. And Jack had just taken a job at a little company in California that I didn't really know about. It was called The Gap.
Right. We have two gaps in our town. We have the kids gap and we have the adult gap.
Yeah. And Jack also had worked in retail after B school. He'd worked for Dayton Hudson.
Okay.
In Minneapolis, and he had joined joined the Gap as the senior operations guy, and we got to talking at this alumni event, and he said, well, you're in retail, you know something about retail. We need more people who understand retail.
Okay.
Why don't you move to California and join the Gap? So I did.
Okay.
And at the time I had that conversation with Jack, Gap had 100 stores. By the time I left Gap, 3.5 or 4 years later, we had 400 stores.
Right.
So it was an astonishing growth journey in a brick and mortar business that was
which has
highly
been
people
consolidated a little bit now. Yeah,
intensive, and you had to,
sure.
when you're opening new stores at a rapid rate, you had to make sure the store got open on the right date because you'd bought the merchandise and it was going to show up. And if you
Right,
didn't
it's a
get that
corporate chain, right? I
store,
mean, it's all logistics
yeah,
and
we
everything.
no franchising. We
Yeah,
owed all the stores. So I really learned how to be an entrepreneur at Gap.
right.
But by the time we got to 400 stores a few years later, it was feeling a little more bureaucratic.
Yeah,
As has to happen.
right.
You have to change some things. And so I said, well, I think I've learned some things about being an entrepreneur. Maybe I should do that myself. So I left Gap,
Okay,
and over the next 10 years or so, I did 2 startups. One of them failed. Learned a lot from that one.
right. You always do more.
And at one point, I was in the early 40s, and I said, I've been working in and around the retailing industry for a long time now, more than 20 years.
Yeah.
And you know what? 20 years in retailing is enough.
Well, is that what the startups were? They were also in retailing?
Well, one was a chain of fresh pasta stores. We built 15 stores in Denver and Chicago that sold fresh pasta and other Italian food to take home, not restaurants, but stores.
Right.
And I said, 20 years in retailing is enough. So what else might I want to do with the rest of my career? I had a lot of years ahead of me, and I did some career counseling, as maybe you do when you're in your 40s and you're thinking about what else you should
coaching,
do.
Counseling, right? People helping, right?
And the conclusion of that counseling was, well, there are 2 alternatives that look pretty interesting. One is to become a business journalist, because I love to write, and I love the power of the spoken and written word.
Right.
And the other was to become a B school professor. And I said, well, I could road test the second one if I could let somebody give me a chance to teach,
like as an adjunct or something.
Yeah, exactly. So I called 3 universities in Denver where I was living at the time.
Okay.
And I said, would there be an opportunity for somebody like me to teach Marketing 101? And, well, what happened is all 3 schools said yes. So I ended up teaching Marketing 101 to 3 different sets of students on 3 different campuses with 3 different schedules, all at the same time.
Now, this wasn't online, right?
No.
You were in Denver. It was in the area. You had to jump from school to school. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I discovered 2 things. Number 1, I loved it. It was really fun.
Right.
And number 2, it turned out I was pretty good at it. So I said, okay, I don't know about the research side of being a professor, because that's really the crucial thing you've got to do if you're going to be a professor full time.
Right.
I said I don't know about that, but maybe I can learn that. And so I went off and got a PhD because I wanted to jump in with both feet. I could have been an adjunct for a long time, but I wanted to really do it right.
Yeah. Now, I remember when I was at Cornell, some of the professors, especially the visiting professors, they were more interested in their research than they were teaching the kids. And they barely had
tell the difference, right?
Yeah. You were the other way around.
Yeah. So I got my PhD, got a job in Denver at the University of Denver, taught there 7 years, earned tenure. And when you get tenure, typically you get something called a sabbatical, and you get to go do some research somewhere else, go visit some other school. Well, I had attended top schools, but I wasn't really teaching at a top school, and I wondered what it would be like to teach at a top school. So I said, wouldn't it be great if I could do this sabbatical at a top school, and ideally outside the country, because I've always had international interests.
Right, because we talk about London Business School. You're not English. You're American.
I'm not a Brit. Yeah,
right.
I'm not a Brit, but I said, wouldn't it be great? So that list of top schools sort of at that time came down to INSEAD outside of Paris and LBS. And it turned out I got sort of a lucky break. So I've been teaching a case study. I'm a case teacher.
Right.
I've been teaching a case study on a Denver-based company, and one of the 2 founders had moved to England to start the British branch of that company. And meanwhile, the other co-founder would come to my class when I taught the case, and he'd hide in the back of the room, and then he'd debrief it, and it would be great fun. So when I wrote to LBS and said, might you have an opportunity to let somebody like me come for a little while work on this new book that I'm working on, and
Right.
and maybe
Yeah, you weren't
maybe
looking
teach
for
a
a
little.
job. This was
No,
the
no, no. It's
sabbatical.
just a sabbatical. Can I
Right, right.
come for a while?
Yeah.
So I ended up going to LBS for 10 weeks, and at the end of that 10 weeks, they said, this was pretty good. Is there any chance we could do this again next year? And you don't get two sabbaticals; you only get
Of
one.
course. Right.
But the academic schedules at DU and at LBS were quite similar, so I
Right.
was able to schedule my teaching the following year at DU, so I could also go to LBS in the winter from in
But that was
January to
also not online.
February.
You had to fly over there.
Oh yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I'm not
So
saying it's
yeah,
Right.
yeah. So at the end of two gigs of that, LBS and I just agreed we should stay. So
Full time.
the 10 weeks has turned into now 24 years, and it's been astonishing
Yeah.
and life changing. This, being at a school like London Business School, which is the most globally diverse business school on the planet,
Yeah.
with
Sure.
incredible students,
Kids from all over
incredible
the world, right?
faculty.
Yeah.
It's
Now,
wonderful.
that's not London Business School is different than the London School of Economics. They're different schools.
Different
Right.
schools.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're only a business school. That's
Right.
all we do. We do it really, really well. We don't have any undergrads. It's only a graduate school of business. So our students have been out. Our MBA students have been out in the world.
Sure.
They know how the world works. It's an incredible environment. So who would have thought?
Exactly.
But there he was, and I'm still there. So
all right. So I got couple of questions, two observations. First of all, I find it interesting that way back then when you were with the Gap, that you considered like 100 chains, storage chain, an entrepreneurial like thing. I always think of entrepreneurship as like, you and I are working out of a garage and we're getting things started and bootstrapping and doing like that. But I guess you kind of took it to your own, like that was really in your mind that it was entrepreneurial, right?
Well, and it clearly was. It had been started by a guy named Don Fisher.
Okay.
Don Fisher was a real estate developer, tall guy, 6'4",
Okay.
and in his business, his typical apparel was a pair of jeans, a Levi's jeans, right? But he could never find his size in the department stores because at the time there were no point of sale systems. They had not been developed yet. So when stores ordered a department store, say, needed more Levi's, they would order sort of the standard assortment of the sizes that predictably would sell. But the result of that was if you were at the end of that size range, as Don was, often they were out of stock in your size.
Right,
so
they
Don
carry
said,
very few of them, right? Same with shoes. It's the same thing, right?
Yeah. So I was astonished to learn that in a Levi's 501 button front jean, that was the classic Levi jean, there are 81 SKUs.
Really?
Different sizes.
Oh, because of the length and the waist,
length and
right?
Waist.
Yeah,
81 different combinations. Well, how the hell do you keep in stock on all 81 of those sizes?
You can't.
If you're a department store and there's no point of sale systems, you don't know what you sold yesterday.
Right.
So Don started a business to solve that customer problem.
Makes sense.
And raised some family and friends money and grew it, a few stores at a time. I think it was 8 years old at the time I joined.
Right.
But it grown from,
still a young company.
Yeah. So
all right. So here's my other question. So you were teaching marketing at the time, and you've been now with LBS for 24 years. So when you first did your adjunct stuff, we're talking 25, 30 years ago. I don't think entrepreneurship was really a thing in those days. There are programs now at the undergraduate, graduate levels that are entrepreneurship, right, degrees. So,
but not them.
Yeah. So how did that evolve? When you joined LBS, were you still teaching marketing at that point? No. Okay.
No. So I road tested, could I teach? Did I want to be a teacher by teaching marketing? Because I sort of had a customer point of view, and there were no entrepreneurship courses in those days.
It was a French word in those days.
Yeah, right. Yeah, George Bush.
Right.
So at DU, we had a really interesting curriculum, and we brought some entrepreneurship content into that curriculum. And I developed a course that I taught called Managing the Growing Business, which is what I had learned to do at Gap, right?
Yeah.
So I was teaching stuff that I knew how to do. in the real world, but I also understood the research that was behind it. So by the time I got my sabbatical, I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneurship professor, not a marketing professor.
But you kind of had to create it.
At DU, I did, but at London Business School, there was already I think it's fair to say, a fledgling, a thriving, but still
Young.
relatively small
Yeah.
entrepreneurship program led by two wonderful guys. And they were looking for more resources because student demand was off the charts. You know,
Yeah, sure.
by that
was the whole
time,
start.
everybody wanted to be an entrepreneur. And who the hell is going to teach that in a business school? You know, the rest of the faculty didn't know anything about entrepreneurship. So there was a real need for people like me. And I had done it, but I also had studied it and I had a PhD. So I was a reasonable bet.
So as I always think of graduate school, when you go to business school, you get your MBA, which is a master's in business administration. But do you still get that with a concentration in entrepreneurship, or is it called something else?
It's entrepreneurship. So you can do finance, you can do marketing, you can do accounting, you can do entrepreneurship.
Got it.
Yeah. And these days, very large numbers of people, students who want to do MBAs, do so specifically with the objective of starting a business. Interestingly,
of course.
It didn't used to be that way. It was 30 years in a gold watch. Worked in some big company. But today, you come to London Business School, and you figure you're going to find an idea that you want to pursue. You're going to find a partner or maybe a tech person you need to do it with you. You're going to find some money, and off you go. And that story plays out time after time at a handful of really top schools that have really invested in thriving entrepreneurship programs. And LBS is one of those schools.
Yeah, I think I saw the guy, I forget his name, who started Peloton. He was being interviewed by Guy Raz in his podcast, but they did on location things. So me and a buddy went to New York and we saw him talking. I think that's what happened. He was looking to start up a business. He wasn't sure what he was going to do. And then this whole thing, the Soul Cycle and whatever. And then he went to, bless you. And then he went to Harvard Business School. He with no intention of, being an analyst or anything like that. So he went and then he started the company, raised money. I don't know, whatever he did. So yeah, it seems to, entrepreneurship is so pervasive now and it's such a common term that we did an academy for middle school and high school kids. We stopped it, but we were doing like 5 or 6 years where the kids would create an idea and go through the whole thing and write a business plan. And there was none of that stuff when I was in school, even at Cornell. And we had some Johnson management undergrad classes. Now they do. Now they have an entrepreneurship, I think, track through the business school and the undergraduate level.
The world has changed.
Yeah. What do you like most about teaching? Not the specific topic, but in general.
Yeah, there's just something magical about being in a classroom with a bunch of other really smart people who want to learn something together, who have stuff to share with one another because they've been out in the real world. And I just love the magic of what can happen in a classroom when the right kind of people, discussing a case study on a relevant company with relevant real world issues. It's just really fun. I'm like Joe Montana. I get paid to have fun.
Yeah, exactly. What kind of, do you remember some of the companies that, not necessarily their names, doesn't really matter, but companies that people have started coming out, or maybe they already had the company and they're working on it and they took the program, went into the program?
Yeah, well, there are tons of them.
Yeah. Anything that pops out?
One of them that I was on the board of for a while is a company called World Remit that does remittances for people from the developing countries who get work in a developed country and want to send money back to their families. Well, that process used to be non-tech enabled. You went into a storefront,
like Western Union or something, right?
You gave them the cash, and the recipient had to go to a storefront or the other, and it was highly inefficient.
Right.
And this guy who's a student of mine, Ishmael Ahmed, said we could make this a digital process to be much more efficient. We could make some money, but more importantly, we could make sure that a much larger percentage of the money actually got to the recipient because there wasn't all the cholesterol in the middle. Well, that company today is worth a couple of billion
That's
pounds.
like the early days of Venmo and Cash App and all those types of things, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
What's it
Yeah,
called?
it's called World Remit, and
Okay. And it
it's a wonderful
specifically
business.
deals with sending money from first world
Country A
countries.
to country B. Yeah,
Interesting.
much of it to Africa, but also many other parts of the world.
Right. Right. Anything else pop out?
There's a ton of them. You know, we've started in the time. So we have something at Atlanta Business School called the Entrepreneurship Summer School,
Okay.
and our MBA is a 2-year MBA. And in most 2-year MBAs, what the students do is they do an internship with somebody, you know, in the summer between the 2 years. But with all these students coming and wanting to be entrepreneurs, we put in place this entrepreneurship summer school to help people figure out if the idea they have to start a new business when they leave LBS
Like an
is
incubator.
actually a good enough, kind of like what we'd call an incubator today.
Yeah.
And we put them through what I call a 7 domains analysis of their opportunity, which is the subject of the very first book I wrote back in 2003, the research for which was done in part at LBS on that initial visit. And we put them through that process. And I ran that course. I developed that course, ran it for many years. I don't anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really interesting to watch what happened in that course. So students had to come to the course with an idea. Here's what I think I want to do.
Okay.
And the idea for the summer was you're going to vet that idea. You're going to talk to potential customers. You got to understand the supply chain. You're going to do all the stuff you need to do, figure out the team you need. And at the end of the summer, you're going to come back and tell us, yeah, this is a pretty good idea. I'm going to start this. Or actually, no, I figured out the flaws in this idea.
Right.
I'm certainly not going to start this idea. And the interesting data point is that of the 300 and some businesses that had been started when I left that course, this is now 2 years ago.
Yeah.
84% of them were still in business. Staggeringly surprising number. But what was really interesting is 2/3 of them were not the idea they started the summer school with.
Right,
so
because
they did the work. They said, this really isn't good enough. Some of them tweaked it a little bit to make it better. Some of them said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something completely different.
Yeah.
So it's been really remarkable to be up close, you know, to all these young entrepreneurs doing really interesting things, not all of which have worked, but the vast majority have.
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting you say that because this is like my soapbox. So the reason that it's called the accidental entrepreneur, right, is due to my frustration with the lack of planning and care and strategic approach and vetting things and, you know, writing things down that business owners do not do. And that's why, you know, the failure, I'm not surprised that 84% of them are still in business today because you brought them through a process that they need to go through to determine, you know, if this is a good idea, is it good the way it is? Maybe it's a great idea, but should not be a business. Maybe it's a great idea that they should not be doing, somebody else should be. I mean, all those things that happen, right? So you do business planning, you know, and it doesn't have to be a, you know, a Stanford great business plan. It could be a lean canvas to start. You got to start with something. But I think that a lot of entrepreneurs who, you know, don't take the time to enroll in a program like yours, like LBS, or, you know, they're just off and running and they're filling their garage with, I don't know, something they're buying in China or they haven't made, and they haven't figured out all the financial side of it and the marketing of it, and they fall flat on their face. And that doesn't even include the ones that struggle, that make it past 5 years or whatever, right? So I'm not surprised because I'm always telling people, you know, like, well, you know, I got to shut my business down. I'm like, well, didn't you just open like 6 months ago? Yeah, I need your help. We got to negotiate out of the lease. We got to do this. We got to do that. I ask them to see their business plan. They don't, it's like crickets. They don't have, you know, a business plan. So when people, I mean, you're obviously getting the 20% of the 20%, right? You're getting the people that are reaching out and saying, yeah, I want to learn this stuff, but it's all the other people that just, it's there. They just don't do it. And it's so frustrating. And it demonstrates what you're saying, demonstrates that what I'm saying is correct. You cannot wing this if you want to be successful. You could. I mean, some people make it.
You might get lucky, but
yeah,
boy,
luck is no good, right?
But, you know, the odds are really tough. We know
really
that the vast majority of most entrepreneurial ventures fail. Some sooner,
Yeah.
some later.
Right.
You can make those odds a lot better if you do some homework. And
Well, that's the
that's
thing.
why I wrote the New Business Road Test back
Yeah.
then. And it is still the go-to Bible of how you assess an entrepreneurial opportunity.
Yeah.
Now,
I mean,
20
that's the
years later.
thing. There's no magic or secret things that nobody's telling you to be more, to increase. We're not going to guarantee you, right? To increase your chances of being successful with your venture. You just have to do the things that other people are unwilling to do, which starts with reading your book and vetting out your idea and not being so attached to say, you know what, maybe this isn't going to work like this. Maybe the demand's not there. Maybe making this product is going to be too difficult. It's too expensive. We can't sell it for that price. Well, I don't know, whatever the 100 reasons that they come up with. Now, the book came out of the course, is that, or is it the other way around?
The book came first. So at the time I had my sabbatical from the University of Denver, I had just started on the research to write this book because it was 1999, and in those days it was the heart of the dot-com boom, the first dot-com boom, right? And there were all these goofball ideas about how you were going to write a business plan, raise some money, and in 20 minutes you're going to be rich,
Right.
And there was a lot of crazy stuff going on, and everybody was saying all you have to do is write a business plan, raise some money, and that's all there is to it. And I realized that people were spending a lot of time writing business plans for ideas that were fundamentally flawed. And what's the point? What's the point of doing all that work?
Right. That's
Why
the
not?
purpose
Why
of
not?
writing it, right?
Why not have a way to figure out if the idea is any good in the first place? And if it is, yeah, then maybe you go on and say, okay, now how am I going to pursue that idea?
Right.
That's what a business plan is. So I started doing research to figure that out.
Oh.
How entrepreneurs and how investors too
Right.
assess opportunities, and that became the New Business Road Test.
Got it.
And
still available, right? On Amazon or whatever?
Yeah, it's in its 5th edition, and it's available everywhere. And out of that book then came the Entrepreneurship Summer School at LBS to take students through that process that my research had uncovered.
Now, was that a boot camp from the standpoint of anybody could enroll in that program, or these were students? These were full-time students that then would go into this program?
It was then and still is a mix. So it's primarily for our MBA students.
But you don't have to be an enrolled student.
But we really liked having some people from the real world outside.
Yeah.
Who
different perspective,
LBS
right?
Students, but brought some diversity to the classroom. So that's still the case.
Did they need to pitch an idea? Did they have to say, this is my idea coming into the program, and you would use it as part of the application process?
They have to apply, and they have to have already done some of the work on assessing the opportunity. They got to go collect some secondary data and look how big the market is and some stuff
ahead
like
of time.
That. Before, and then they apply, and the fact that they've done that work shows that maybe they're committed.
Right, of course.
People who are
it's your
committed.
Vetting process to a certain extent, right?
Yeah, but we don't try and vet the idea. We don't say, well, we think that's a good idea or bad idea. That's not our job. It's their job for the summer to figure out whether that opportunity is going to really fly.
Sure. All right. So why don't we do this? Let's take a break. I think it's commercials are a few minutes, and then we can talk about. Well, we'll talk about your current book, but a lot of your books are about the things you need, the 6 things you need. Well, the one TED Talk is the 6 things you need to do to be successful in entrepreneurship, right? That's not the exact title. I know that, but
no.
And people can listen to the TED Talk, but like you had told me off the mic, it's a boiled down version of 17 minutes from the whole book. So there's a lot of things to talk about. But maybe we can talk about the things you see that people do right, people do wrong, and what they need to do to be more successful. Because I think you talk a lot about thinking outside the box and being creative and bootstrapping and all that type of stuff. But let's take a break, and then we'll talk about that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. All right, John. Yeah, so let's talk about all the stuff that you preach, and because that's what got me hooked was the TED Talk, and now I'm ordering your book. I waited though. I'll be honest with you because I've had so much stuff going on, but I'm gonna. It's not. I didn't even ask you. Are the books on Audible?
Some are. A couple of them are. A couple of them aren't.
I like to listen because I drive in the car and whatever. I'm a podcast guy. All right, where do you want to start? You want to talk about what you're talking about now? Your current book?
Yeah, let's talk about Break the Rules, because
Okay.
I think it's the first book I've written that's written for an audience that's much wider than the entrepreneurial audience. So
Okay,
all
good.
my other books dealt with a particular issue uh, of the a particular stage in the entrepreneurial journey. So the New Business Road Test was all about assessing an opportunity before you start the business.
Right.
Figure out if this is the right thing to do. The second book, which I wrote with Randy Commissar, a partner at Kleiner Perkins in California,
Okay.
it's called Getting to Plan B, and it addresses the challenge of figuring out a business model that's really going to work. And when we wrote the book, there was all this talk about business models.
Right.
Every third sentence from an entrepreneur had the phrase business model in it. We didn't think anybody really knew what they meant when they used that word. What are you
Right.
talking about? Business model. So we wrote a book to help people get from an initial idea about what they might do to a set of economics that's really going to work, the plan B. So we know empirically that for most startups, plan A doesn't work. So for PayPal, for example, that was plan G, the seventh iteration
Right.
of what was not a perfect
you don't
idea
get
at the
it right
beginning,
the first
but
time.
it took a while to get there. So
Yeah, of course.
So getting to plan B was all about that. And then as a result of researching getting to plan B, I came across Costco, and we wrote a chapter on Costco, or part of a chapter on Costco and getting to plan B.
Yeah.
And their business model, which is remarkable. As you and probably your listeners know, you have to pay to shop in a Costco store.
Yeah,
Well, that's the most ridiculous idea.
Right.
That's the most ridiculous idea. You have to pay to shop in a store.
Right.
But
John,
we do it in droves, right?
Yeah,
we do it in droves.
And I think it was originally supposed to be like a business club, right? And you would join and get discounts because you're join. I don't know if that's true or not.
No, that
was my
true.
impression. No,
they call it Costco wholesale, but it's not wholesale.
No.
Wholesale, it's for you and me.
Right.
The very interesting thing I discovered in doing that research is your $50 and my $50 that everybody pays to join Costco is 2/3 of their operating income every year. 2/3. It's
because their
just
margins
a
are tight.
membership phase.
Yeah, because their margins are tight, and that's all.
Therefore, their margins can be tight because they've already made 2/3 of the money they have to make. Well, if you're Target or Marks and Spencer in the UK, how the hell do you compete with that? It's really hard.
It's like Prime, right?
Yeah,
Amazon Prime. Everybody, 14 billion people paying $100 a year. It adds up.
It adds up real fast. So when we finished Plan B, I said that Costco store is really interesting. They basically have built that business on the customer's money.
Yeah.
I wonder, I said, if there are other examples of that.
Okay.
And that led to my third book called The Customer Funded Business. That's about the 5 different ways you can get customers to fund your business rather than getting investors to fund your business. And there are a whole lot of really good reasons why that makes sense. And then a couple of years ago, I was thinking about the work I had done. I was sort of taking stock of all the case studies I'd written on entrepreneurs and the books I'd written. And I said, the world needs more entrepreneurial thought and action today. Entrepreneurs leading fast-growing companies create all of the net new jobs. It doesn't matter what economy you're in. Entrepreneurs leading fast-growing companies create all the jobs. We need more of that. At the time, every country needed more jobs. And entrepreneurs are the ones that change the world. So I said, we need more of that kind of thinking. So I wonder, and I look back at the research that had been done on trying to figure out who entrepreneurs are and what's different about them.
Right.
So when I first came into academia, there had been a bunch of research at the time when entrepreneurship kind of got onto the academic radar about, well, what's the difference between a successful entrepreneur and some other successful business person? And all of that research, tons of studies, basically found no differences. For every extrovert, there's an introvert like Michael Dell. For every PhD like Sergey Brin from Google, there's an immigrant with not very much education like Hamza Ukalaya, who started Chobani Yogurt and has built a wonderful business. They couldn't find any differences. And yet, from having been up close to so many entrepreneurs for so many years, I knew there were differences. And I said, well, maybe I can figure out what those differences are. So let me review what I've learned over these years in studying and creating these case studies. And the result of that is that what's different, that's different about successful entrepreneurs from other successful business people, is in their mindsets.
Okay.
And a mindset, so I said, well, what's a mindset? A mindset is the habits and the intuitions and the thing we have in our brain,
perception of things, how you react to things.
That when something comes along our way, that triggers how we react to that something. And those somethings we entrepreneurs call opportunities, of course, right? So when an opportunity comes along, these mindsets that entrepreneurs have cause them to react in ways that are fundamentally different than somebody working at a big business would react.
Right.
And I said, this way of thinking can be learned. And so I need to write a book and bring these ideas to light. And here we are. Now, Break the Rules is just over a year old, and it's on Amazon and it's on the TED Talk. It's all over the place because people want to learn how to think and act more entrepreneurially today. Whether it's entrepreneurs themselves or whether it's people in big companies that are being dragged down by the bureaucracy and the slow growth and the inability to innovate that we see in so many places.
Yeah.
So that's why I wrote the book.
Yeah. But there's an interesting dichotomy between entrepreneurs in large corporations who are trying to get people to think more entrepreneurial and actual entrepreneurs in the street. But I've had this conversation with people all the time. There's, all entrepreneurs, not all entrepreneurs, but the ones on the street, all those entrepreneurs are business owners, but not all business owners are entrepreneurs. We use that term so interchangeably, right? And yeah, I think it's more of the creative side, thinking about when you face adversity or see something or learn something. The guys I know that are really successful entrepreneurs from business to business, different industry, that's what they do. They see things, or they look for things, or they evaluate things differently than other people that are, more shy to do it. They're just not, the word's not shy. It's hesitant, I guess is a better word. They're like conservative.
Well, I think what's happened is over the years, the world of big business has learned how to do certain things. So, for example, there was a book called In Search of Excellence by Tom Peters many
Sure.
years ago. And
Yep.
Tom Peters argued that what well-run companies do is they stick to their knitting.
Yeah.
They figure out what they're really good at. There was some similar work by C.K. Prahalad at about the same time, articulating this idea of core competencies. You want to understand what your core competencies are. You should
Right.
build on them, invest in them, make them more robust. And if somebody comes along and says, "Gee, could you do something that sits outside those core competencies?" You're supposed to say, "No, we don't do that.
Right.
Stick to your knitting." Well, entrepreneurs don't think that way.
Not at all.
So if some customer or prospective customer comes along and says, "Could you do this for me?" Even though you have no idea where you're going to get the right people to do it, where you're going to get the money to finance it,
You say yes.
If you believe that there's an opportunity there that fits what you as an entrepreneur want to do, you say, "Yes, we can." And that's the first of the 6 mindsets
Yeah.
that Break the Rules is all about. And it of course runs counter to what we've been taught to do in big businesses. And it
Right.
kind of flies in the face of a lot of what we teach in business schools like mine, right?
Right. Well, you don't want to be, fall on your face. You don't want to fail. So you stick with what you know, and people don't go out of their comfort zone. And, I run into people. There was a guy, I don't work with him anymore, but he ran a business with his brother that they took over from the father. The father had a deli route, Thuman's, Boar's Head, whatever. He would deliver to hotels and whatever. So one day he's in the city, and the guy from the hotel comes over and says, "Listen, can you do me a favor? Can you talk to our catering director and show him how to make like sandwiches? He's not good at doing whatever." And these guys would just deliver this stuff. So, long story short, he has an interaction with this catering guy who's just not very nice. And he goes to the guy, the manager, says, "Listen, how about if we make the sandwiches for you?" And the guy said, "Sure, I need 1,200 sandwiches by Friday." So on his way home, he picks up like 4 or 5 slicing machines, goes back to the office and says, "Listen, guys, we're going to make sandwiches." Right. And they started a business. Basically, they really work for just university catering companies, doing all the universities up and down the East Coast. I think it's an $80 or $100 million gross business now that they just make gourmet sandwiches, and they have this whole logistic thing about. It's a logistics business now. It's not a sandwich business. He's got, I said, what was it? Notre Dame wanted them to take the account. He said, I can't do Notre Dame. It's too far. I would need a commissary. I got to know that if a truck breaks down on the road, I get it out, new one out there, and get the stuff because it's got to be fresh and this and that. And it was just because he didn't say no. Because that's what his office said. How the hell are we going to make 1,200 sandwiches? And then the next day, they got the sandwiches done. Monday, he said, "Listen, I need 5,000 then in 2 weeks or whatever." And they do. But you're right. There's definitely a personality type, but it is something you can learn. You said this before, right? I mean, you can learn those skills.
You can learn to do that. Yeah.
But don't you think some of it's a little bit like, I know people that could learn a lot, but they're still too afraid to fail.
Well, I don't argue that everybody should be an entrepreneur.
Right,
for some people, it's just not what you want to do, right?
Yeah.
But there are a lot of us. I mean, I didn't have any idea that I was going to be an entrepreneur when I left business school. I came from a family of educators. Nobody in my family had been a business person.
Right.
So, I had no idea that would lie in my future. But when the opportunity came, and I'd learned some things at Gap to give me the skills to do it, well, that turned out to be a great career path for me. And so I want to open the doors to other people who are maybe bogged down in a career they're not 100% excited about, and they can learn these mindsets and they can find an opportunity, and off they go.
So can we go over I think the TED Talk is 6 steps to, can we go over them?
So there's 6 of these mindsets, not 5, not 7. There are 6 of them.
Okay.
So yes, we can. Yes, we can do something outside our comfort zone is the first of them. The second one I call problem first, not product first logic. So if you think about big companies, think about Coca-Cola, for example. There was Coca-Cola, and then they came out with New Coke. Well, that didn't work too well. But then there's Diet Coke, and there's now Coke Zero that's doing really well. And there's Cherry Coke and Vanilla Coke and all these different kind of Cokes. They're always fiddling with the damn product.
Right.
Is that innovation, guys? I mean, that's not going to get you rapid growth, right?
Right.
Same thing with Tide.
Tide's the laundry detergent?
The laundry detergent. I told this story in the TED Talk, but my wife and I have used Tide for many years when we're in the U.S. You can't get Tide in London. And we can always tell when the brand manager has changed at Tide, because they changed something. So they're little blue speckles in Tide today. Well, they used to be green speckles. Well, some brand manager came along and changed the green to blue.
Yeah.
And then they changed the scent. It goes from Sea Breeze to Mountain Fresh, and I don't know what the next one is. Come on,
you don't notice the difference.
Is this? Why are you growing so slowly? Because you're not really innovating. But what entrepreneurs do is they don't focus on the product like Tide and like Coca-Cola do. They focus on problems. And if you can find a compelling problem that a customer has that isn't solved very well, like Phil Knight did in starting Nike, distance runners had a real problem.
Yeah.
Elite distance runners did. They don't run around tracks like sprinters do. They train on country roads and dirt paths, and they're stepping on rocks and sticks.
Yeah, and there was nothing out there for them.
They get, a lot of sprained ankles and shin splints. And Phil Knight and his track coach, Bill Bowerman, said, we need a shoe explicitly designed for elite distance runners. Well, they solved that problem. They built a shoe with wider lateral stability and more cushioning to guard against the shin splints. And by the way, the shoe is lighter in weight, and therefore, when you take just a couple ounces of weight off,
makes a big difference.
It makes a difference in your race times.
Sure.
Well, it was more than 5 years before Phil Knight could quit his day job and devote full time to the business. There's a wonderful book called Shoe Dog that he wrote about the story. Fantastic book.
Yeah.
Hilarious book. But once they learned how to import shoes from Japan, once they learned how to design shoes with the input of the athletes that are going to wear those shoes,
right?
And once they learned how to promote those shoes through endorsements of top athletes,
right?
Then it was time to call John McEnroe and say, let's do tennis. And then there was Michael Jordan. Let's do basketball.
Which changed everything.
But the whole premise of that business is find a problem that you can solve and let the product follow, right?
Right.
And then, so that's the second one, problem first, not product first logic.
And John, I think if you put the product first, you are making the decision of what you're solving. You're not letting...
And you might be wrong.
Yeah, you're usually wrong. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's why plan A often doesn't work.
Right.
Yeah. It's very common in tech businesses. Look what we could build. You build it.
Nobody cares, or it doesn't work, or whatever.
Nobody cares.
Yeah.
So the third one is also reflected in the Nike story. I call it think narrow, not broad. But the basic idea is that in big companies today, you can't get authorization to do anything new unless it can move the needle. The big company isn't going to mess around with something really small.
They don't care, right? It's too small. That's why they buy. Right? That's why they buy the company that's doing well, because it's better for them than starting a little.
Yeah.
Right.
So they outsource the innovation. They
basically
they buy something else.
Yeah.
But again, getting back to Knight and Bowerman, the target market for their early running shoes was elite distance runners, people who could run nearly a 4-minute mile. Well, how big is that target market? is tiny.
Especially in those days.
Well, even today, how many people can run a 4-minute mile?
Exactly, right.
I can't. You can't.
Yeah, that's true.
So, entrepreneurs look for these tiny little niche markets,
right,
where there's a problem. So putting together, thinking narrowly, not broadly, and problem first logic. And they find these tiny little markets where they can deliver something that nobody else is delivering to solve that problem. And then once you've done that and you build a platform and you have a foundation and it works, then you figure out how to grow that. So thinking narrowly
right
at the outset about a tiny target market is a much better way to go than saying, "Oh, I'm gonna if I could only sell 1% Coke to 1% of the kids in China,
I'll make a fortune."
I'll
right,
be rich."
exactly. So, but that's like proof of concept, right? I mean, basically, you're proving the concept. But I think if you and I were sitting in the room, like we're building shoes for my response to you, and maybe it's my shortcoming, right? Because you're the smart professor, and I'm just this little attorney in New Jersey. I would say, John, why are we doing that? How many people are we going to sell shoes to? And what would your response be?
And that's why big companies don't do that sort of stuff.
Because there's no money in it for them.
Because there's not enough money. But for the entrepreneur, well, that's going to give me a starting point, and I'm going to learn a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly where that's going to lead me. So Knight and Bowerman didn't know that was going to lead him to tennis and basketball and all that.
Right.
Stuff,
they just knew they could make money, maybe not a lot, but enough for the two of them to sell these sneakers to this small market, and that's it. And then that would be fine, right? Because they're not Procter and Gamble. They're not Adidas or whatever companies were around in those days. Maybe I'm answering my own question.
Well, it was Adidas that was making the track shoes in those days, but they were really made for sprinters who run on tracks.
Right.
They weren't made for distance runners. And, it's quite clear today that Nike has eaten Adidas'
their lunch. Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, so that's number 3.
Yeah, that's the third one.
Yeah.
Then the fourth one I call ask for the cash, ride the float.
Okay. Ask for the cash.
So the basic idea is, if you're an entrepreneur, you want to get paid before you even build a product.
Well, ideally,
because it's wonderful validation that you're onto something if somebody's willing to pay you before you even build it.
Right.
But B, that means you can grow much faster. So Michael Dell built Dell Computer at about the same time Steve Jobs built Apple, right? Two guys with different visions for fundamentally the same kind of product, right? In the same industry. Well, Steve Jobs built Apple by raising round after round after round of venture capital. And credit to Steve Jobs, he did a fantastic job. He did get fired along the way.
Right.
He had to come back. But we'd all like to be Steve Jobs. But Michael Dell did it differently. He said, I'm going to get paid before I build the computer. And he did that from day one. So he never had to raise big rounds of venture capital. He got one round of family money, $300,000, not very much money. But the rest of it was built by the customers paying up front. It kind of goes back to my
ordered the computer and then they built it.
My other book.
Yeah.
So you ask for the cash up front, and you ride that float. And the coolest story I think I tell in Break the Rules is about Tesla. So Musk was not a founder of Tesla. Most people think he's the founder, but he wasn't. There was a small team of guys.
Right.
And they were looking for some money, and Musk had made a lot of money at PayPal, and agreed to put some money in and come on board and join the team. Well, the first thing Musk said is, "Let's go sell some cars, guys." They hadn't built any yet.
Right. Take some orders.
So they did a roadshow in California, and in about 3 weeks, they sold 100 Tesla Roadsters, none of which had been built yet.
What, did they have a prototype at that point? Only?
No prototype, only an idea.
Okay.
The price is $100,000, cash on the barrelhead tonight. Well, we'll do the math. 100 Roadsters times $100,000 each. That's $10 million.
Right.
With which you can now go out and actually build some cars.
Right. Well, how do
Right?
you convince somebody to write a check for $100,000 with
For a
nothing
car
but a
that doesn't
concept?
exist.
Yeah. Not only doesn't exist, the parts didn't even exist. They didn't have batteries that could run these things at the time. He didn't care. He's like, no, we can do it.
We can do it.
Yeah.
And they did.
Yeah.
And they
Well,
did.
talk to enough people, I guess, right?
And that same principle has carried Tesla all the way through its journey. So years later, when they finally wanted to introduce a more or less mass market car, the Model 3,
Right. They took
they
pre-orders.
did the same thing. Take orders. Do you know, Mitch, how many orders they took?
Oh, it's got to be thousands, right?
Almost 500,000 orders in advance,
right?
At $1,000 deposit each. Do that math. That's $500 million US dollars in the bank with which to get the factory up and running, build the tooling, hire the engineers, do all the stuff by riding this float that your customers have given you. It's by far the best way to finance a business.
Well, obviously, and they now had a proven concept, and they had, they were making the batteries and the whole thing. Now, you think that it had a lot to do with the fact that Elon Musk was driving the company at the time, at the beginning, when people put money in, because here's a guy who was successful with PayPal, made a lot of money. I'm going to follow his lead. If it wasn't him and it was just that group of guys that were starting the company, you think it would have been not as fruitful results at the beginning?
Well, who's to say? Elon Musk has some magic, and people love or hate him, but there are plenty who love him. But the same thing with Michael Dell. Michael Dell sold computers from his dorm room at age 19 at the University of Texas.
Right.
Well, if a 19-year-old freshman at the University of Texas can convince people to buy a computer that he hasn't built yet, I tell my aspiring entrepreneurs, can't you do that too?
Yeah, in a day when parts weren't as readily available.
If you have found a compelling problem that a customer has, and you can articulate that you're a trustworthy person and you're not just going to take the money, you're going to build it and you're going to deliver, off you go.
Right. And look, there have been other companies that have failed in the PC marketplace. There's only a handful of companies now. Gateway, remember Gateway? They were like Dell's competitor, gone. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the fourth one.
Okay.
The fifth of these counter-conventional mindsets, I call them. And I call them counter-conventional because they break the rules that are followed in big companies, right? So one of the things that's kind of a rule in a big company is when you want to do something new, you figure out, okay, I've got to invest this much money. I got to build a prototype or a factory or whatever it is I got to build. And then you do a forecast of the cash flows you're going to get, once you've made that investment. And if the ROI is good enough and passes the company's hurdle rate, then they give you the money and you can go off and do it. Well, entrepreneurs say, wait a second. I don't really know for sure that my idea is going to work here, right?
Right.
They understand the odds. And so instead of making that upfront investment, wouldn't it be better if I could borrow the assets I need, and borrow in a sense, find somebody else with the assets I need that will let me use those assets? So when I did my second startup, Pasta Via, where we built a chain of fresh pasta stores, we didn't really know for sure whether the company in California that we're sort of copying, whether the demand they had in San Francisco would be the same in a place like Denver or Chicago.
Right. Different demographics.
Different demographics, different tastes in food and so on. So we didn't know for sure if it's going to work. So do you want to go build a commercial kitchen for your first store?
No way.
No, you don't. What do you do? Well, you borrow a commercial kitchen. You find somebody.
You do them at night when they're not using the kitchen.
And that's exactly what we did. And we ran our first. It was store number 5 before we finally said, okay, now we've got proof of traction. Now we're going to go actually build a commercial.
And you had some cash flow probably too. Now, was that the venture that succeeded?
Ultimately, that failed.
That was the one that failed.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what happened to Pasta Via is we were growing and building stores. We built out a bunch of stores in Denver. Then we opened in Chicago. And then these wonderful little packages of fresh pasta that we all buy today came along in the supermarkets,
They're
right?
shrink wrapped, right? Yeah, they're like.
And what's magical about that packaging is there's two things in that plastic package. There's pasta, fresh pasta, and there's nitrogen gas. There's no oxygen in there, so
Right. So it keeps
the
forever.
pasta keeps
Not
for a
forever, but a long time.
for a long time, right?
Right.
So no red-blooded American is going to come into the cute little Pasta Via store that's a block or two away from the supermarket when they can just reach into the cooler at King Soopers in Denver and buy a package of supposedly fresh
Right.
nitrogen packed
Fresh is
pasta
this word.
to take home, and that technology killed us.
It just killed you. I see it working like if you were in a European country where they don't have the supermarkets we have, and they get things fresh that day, and they stop. Maybe they could make it there, but that's interesting. So what was the other? I know we're going to get back to the other things, but what was the other business that you did? The one that succeeded?
Yeah, the other one was a crazy idea that a friend of mine and I had. So Donna and I had been living in California, working for the Gap, and then I left Gap, and I wanted to do something entrepreneurial, and we were thinking about moving to Colorado for personal reasons.
You were in California at that point, right?
We were in San Francisco at the time, and so we started this little company with my best friend from business school, a guy named Rick Stoltz, with the goal of keeping Rick and Josie and Donna and I friends because we were going to move.
Right.
Now that's a pretty crazy reason to build a business, but anyway, we did that, and we built a business around a product that is still used and was used more then to light barbecue charcoal. So the gas grills were not so common in those days, and most people barbecued with charcoal.
Right.
But it was a pain in the neck to light the charcoal because it took a while.
Yeah,
you had to spray this smelly fluid on it, and you don't want that
food, right?
Yeah. So there was a product that was on the market from some small-time entrepreneur in the American South.
Yeah.
That was basically a metal cylinder.
Yeah, we had one. It was a fire starter. You fill it up, you put the stuff underneath, and because it's contained, it cooks the coals quicker, and then you pour it into the thing. What's it called?
It's called Easy Embers was our brand name.
No, but the generic thing, it's like is it a fire starter or a charcoal?
It's a charcoal starter.
Yeah. Okay.
So Rick and I ran that business for 10 years. We sold $250,000 of those over those 10 years. Very small business.
You were a distributor to?
No. We made it.
You made it. You were the manufacturer. And who are you selling to? B2B?
Well, no. We sold. Today you could sell them online, maybe, but in those days, we sold them to home centers and
got it.
And mail order catalogs and that sort of thing. And we ran that business successfully for 10 years. It never made a profit because we spent all the money on board meetings in very nice places between Rick and Josie and Donna and I.
Yeah, that was it.
But we had a wonderful we had a wonderful little lifestyle business that we ran for 10 years.
That's funny. I was just in Home Depot the other day, and I saw one of those with the handle on it. And
they still exist. We invented that handle. That handle was our innovation. Yeah.
That's so funny. So I said to my wife, remember when we used to use a charcoal grill? Because we don't do that anymore. And that thing used to work great. So it's always I love to. I get some inventors on the show every once in a while that have some cool things.
I bet you do. Yeah.
So what were we on, 4 or 5?
So that was the fifth one. The idea that if you can borrow the assets you need to do something instead of investing in them,
because it's really testing,
it's a much better way. You're market testing.
You're testing, you're bootstrapping. Well, John, that's one of the big mistakes I see business owners make is that they invest, maybe emotionally too much money into this concept or idea or product, whatever, and then they find out that it's not in demand or they're not doing it right or they're they're overextended. So good point. Exactly. Good number 5. Okay.
Yeah. And then the last one I call never ask permission, beg forgiveness later. And of course, that's what the Uber guys did, right? If the Uber guys had gone to the regulators in San Francisco and said, hey guys, we want to build a taxi company that doesn't own any taxis. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
That wasn't going to work. So, but these days, digital technology has made possible doing lots of things that the current regulations have not contemplated. So they aren't
Right.
illegal because
Yeah. No,
nobody
because I
thought of
haven't
them
caught up.
before.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So in a big company, if you wanted to do that, the lawyers would be saying, well, wait a second, we better check with the regulators, and we don't want to
Right.
send anybody to jail, and blah,
Yeah.
blah,
Of
blah, blah,
course.
blah. You never get it done.
Yeah.
But for an entrepreneur, if the laws are ambiguous or just aren't there to tell you can't do what you want to do, well, off you go, right?
Yeah.
And if at some point you have to ask forgiveness of the regulators, you do that. And
Yeah.
Uber has built a nice business, needless to say, as has Grab and Kareem and many imitators all around the world.
Right.
And I would venture to say that if they hadn't done that, we might not have the gig economy that we have
Right.
today.
Yeah, exactly. Because people can do things on the side. I think Airbnb is another good example of that, right? If a large corporation had that idea, some executive, they would go, we're not doing that. We're going to get sued till, absolutely. Yeah, I always say always better to ask for forgiveness than permission.
Yeah. Now, I make very clear in Break the Rules that we're not talking about breaking the law.
Right,
here.
of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's a story in the book about some entrepreneurs in California who wanted to empower people to do home cooking,
right,
and sell it, and cook in their kitchen and sell it online. Well, that's explicitly against the health and safety laws.
You mean they would sell the fresh stuff to the people and encourage them to then resell it?
So build a marketplace, So Sally is cooking, from Ethiopia, is cooking really interesting Ethiopian food in her kitchen.
Yeah.
And connecting it in an online marketplace with people who want to come pick it up.
No, you're facilitating things that are not regulated.
Can't do that.
Yeah. I'll tell you a funny story. I got referred to a guy. He's like, just like you, I vet ideas. I'm helping him, whatever. His idea was so in larger cities, especially with younger people, millennials, whatever, you might not have internet. You might not be paying for internet, but your neighbor has internet and they give you the password so you can log onto the internet. Maybe you slip them $5 or $10 under the door every month because to offset their costs, and they appreciate it. They don't care, right? It's all like this underground thing. It's not legal, but if you live next to me, John, and I'm just starting out, I'm a young guy, I'm like, hey, can I just, whatever? You probably wouldn't care, right? So his idea, and he had put in a lot of money and time and effort into this and whatever, was he was creating an app, a marketplace where you and I could share our internet and facilitate the transactions back and forth. So if you had the app, you would log in and you would set up your Verizon, and then you would share with me and I would transfer. So after we got through this, I said, what is going to happen? If you don't succeed, doesn't really matter, right? So it's failed. What's going to happen when Verizon discovers that there's one or two people in a building of 300 or 400 people that have internet, nobody else does, because they're all sharing internet? He says, I don't know. I said, well, it's a violation. You're encouraging every customer to violate the terms of their agreement with the internet company. And it won't be Verizon that's suing you. Verizon's going to call T-Mobile and it's Sprint in those days and AT&T, and they're going to get together if you're successful and sue the pants off of you because you're encouraging people to steal a service from a company that it's not legal. And he was like, had this look on his face, like he was so disappointed that this wasn't going to work. And he had probably spent $100,000 in development for this application. And nobody along the way said, not only is it just a bad idea, but it's illegal. Yep. Well,
so there you go, Mitch. Those are the 6 counter-conventional mindsets, as I call them, that I think anybody can learn. They are not the way big companies work. It's not the kind of stuff that gets taught in most business schools, but it's how entrepreneurs think and act. And any of your listeners can take any one or two of those mindsets and put them to work, and off they go.
Well, I appreciate it, John. I'm sure we could talk for a long time today. But the book's available on Amazon. Is it one of the Audible books or no?
Yeah.
It is an Audible book. Good. So I'm going to download the Audible version. And they also can listen to your TED Talks, including the one that, highlights the book. And, keep doing all the great things you're doing. I'm always looking for people that are like, yeah, why aren't you listening to me? Look at John. Look what he's saying. Do the right things that can make you have more chance of succeeding. So I guess you're going to keep carrying that torch and keep talking on that soapbox, right?
And Mitch, thanks for doing what you do to
appreciate it.
Spread the good ideas and make them accessible to everybody.
I don't think I have 1 million downloads compared to the TED Talk you did. You reached more people, but we're slowly getting there.
You'll get there.
All right. Thanks, John. I appreciate it.
Great to be with you, Mitch.
Okay.
Thank you. Do I need to stay on for it to download
or
upload or whatever?
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Accidental Entrepreneur. Opening and closing music written and performed by Howie Moskovich and made to order music. For information about Howie and his music services, please follow the link in our show notes. If you like the podcast, please tell others about us. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, on Amazon Music, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and most of the other podcast directories. If you like what you hear, please leave us a 5-star review and feel free to share our episodes on social media. If you have any questions or comments, ideas for the show, or you'd even like to appear as a guest, reach out to us by email at info@beinhackerlaw.com.
The Accidental Entrepreneur is hosted by Mitch Beinhacker and produced by Beinhacker Law. If you'd like to learn more about our business and legal services, you can find us on social media or visit our website at beinhackerlaw.com. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe to our feed to be notified of all future episodes.